Also, we would ask that you mute your microphones if you are not speaking. During the keynote, you can put your questions and comments in the chat, and Angelica and I will moderate the chat, or you can hold your questions to the end. And I know Morgan has a couple of interactive parts as well where you can chime in. And so now I'd like to introduce Morgan Lindberg, our keynote speaker. Morgan is a full-time instructor of Japanese language at Portland Community College in Portland, Oregon. In addition to teaching courses in first and second year Japanese, she also teaches courses on food in Japanese culture and Japanese popular culture in English. When she's not working, reading, or watching movies with her cat, she's probably gardening. So I will turn it over to you, Morgan.
Thanks, Nellie. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna start sharing my presentation. Well, she said she was going to start sharing her presentation. Just a second. Okay, I know this is possible. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's see. Gonna work this time. Okay. Really hope this part isn't you recorded, but it probably is. I'm having a hard time sharing. It'll happen eventually here. I know it will. Thank you for your patience.
It's always the fun issue of WebEx and getting it to cooperate.
we that we do. All right. Okay, let's see if this will work. There it is. Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So the title of my presentation is Kawaii means more than just cute, using the products, practices, and perspectives models to understand and discuss popular culture. And my focus is on Japan and Asia, but I think I'm going to present a model that you could use to talk about any culture, really. So the agenda today is I'm going to give you some background on why teaching about Japanese popular culture is important to me. So you know a little bit about me and what I bring to this. Introduce the products, practices, and perspectives, or 3Ps model for investigating culture. I'll give you an example, sort of broader example from Japanese popular culture, and as Nellie said, there will be time for Q&A at the end. All right, so here we go. So who am I? I'm in that picture. So my name is Morgan Lindberg, and I'm a full-time faculty at Portland Community College in Portland, Oregon. I've been full-time since 2012. I'm from Portland. I've been teaching Japanese since 2006. Primarily, I teach first and second year, and I teach courses in immersion, which means we start in Japanese on the first day, which might sound impossible or what, but it's actually possible, and it's a really good methodology for giving students an environment to learn language. So mostly I teach language classes, but I also teach culture classes, as Nellie said. So I started learning Japanese when I was 14. I started in high school, and that was my first opportunity to learn a language. And when I was growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. What I knew that I wanted was to learn other languages and go to other countries. That's all. That was as specific as it ever got. So my first opportunity was in high school. I went to Japan for the first time when I was 16 years old, and I stayed with this wonderful family, the Horyes, who are still my family in central Japan. That's from 2016. Language learning was incredibly difficult for me, and I struggled for many years to be able to get to where I am now. And what I found was context, culture, knowing why people said what they said, did what they did, really helped. It helped me understand what I was doing in the language. So I started learning Japanese and engaging with this culture 30 years ago. This was, I think we all know, before the wide use of the internet. And there were more people in Japan and outside Japan, and whose people's main association with Japan, I think, was World War II. Many people had experienced World War II in the Pacific and had that direct experience. And if people saw or knew about Japan at all, it was through, this picture here on the left-hand side. It was traditional culture. things like, think of the book and the show Shogun, right? Geisha and samurai and castles and swords and tea ceremony and things like that. If people had, and more what we call traditional Japanese culture. If people had a popular culture image from Japan, it was Godzilla, this guy in the middle, and the sort of monster movies and kaiju eiga and things like that. Um, that was the extent of popular culture for a long time, not a whole lot else. Overall, I have observed in my time learning about Japan sort of an overwhelming tendency to exoticize Japanese and Asian cultures, to use words like unknowable, inscrutable, awkward, weird, and opaque to talk about it. And what always has struck me as sort of odd is that this is to use these words to talk about a people and their culture, human beings, and what they do together. And so, I mean, I started out thinking none of this is inscrutable or weird or awkward. These are people and their culture. So let's talk about it. Let's study it. But being that I was trained by people for whom Japanese culture was this more of a traditional side, and there was a tendency to sort of put aside Godzilla and more popular culture products, practices, and perspectives. So I was brought up reading mostly literature, pre-modern literature, modern literature, sort of up to 1970. And if anything beyond literature for me was maybe classic Japanese films, by people like Kurosawa Akira and Yasujiro Ozu, Mizoguchi Kenji, the sort of black and white films. Um, that was that was the extent of Japanese culture. And so my attitude when my students would start coming to me with a really huge enthusiasm for things like video games from Japan and animated films and something like Pokemon. There's a picture of Pikachu there on the right hand side. My attitude was sort of like, well, that's nice for you. I'm really glad you're interested. I'm really glad you're here, but that's not for me, right? You like it, I love it, but it's not for me. Over time, my students' interest in that continued. And so I started thinking, well, it must be significant. If they like it, that is significant. There must be something to it. And their enthusiasm and their love helped to change my perspective. And also, it sort of sums up in this quote at the top from Murakami Haruki in his first work. There's something to be learned from everything, from even the most ordinary, commonplace thing. There's always something you can learn. And so I decided that it was my responsibility to find out what it was that was important and significant about these things that my students love. And it really changed my attitude pretty dramatically. So at this point, I feel like my role in teaching students about Japanese culture and Japanese popular culture is to respect, foster, and honor their interests first. And to put these products and practices into context for them, to give historical background, to give more information so that they understand that it's not insignificant, these things that they love, that has a place in Japanese culture, and to give them more understanding about that. And to provide students with an opportunity to make connections between Japanese popular culture and their own cultures, and to discover the sort of similarities and differences. Because I'll tell you, a lot of my students who consider themselves to be part of dominant United States culture will say every day that I don't have a culture, which is not true. And so they don't, it's hard to see when you're inside a culture the things of a culture that you're interacting with, but uh, culture is everywhere. And so I want them to be able to make those connections and not just see someplace outside the United States as a place that has culture. And my fourth role is to continue to learn and grow and change, and so that I can be better for my students. So with that in mind, I use this model we call it the three P's: product, practice, and perspectives model. I didn't make this up. It was not me. This model comes from from ACTFL, the American Federation of Teachers of Foreign Language. That is the governing body of language teachers in the United States. And this is incorporated into their 5 C's World Readiness Standards for language teaching. If you want to know, 5 C's is communications, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. So, and I also have to shout out, I did not come up with this sort of model for teaching my culture courses by myself. I developed these courses alongside my best friend and work sister, Stephanie Orba, who I hope is here, who teaches her courses on Spanish culture. I couldn't have done it without her. So we decided as language teachers to use this model in our courses taught in English. So you see how they work together in the sort of triangular model. Nothing is sort of, practices have perspectives and products have perspectives and practices. And of course, perspectives are linked to all three. Nice triangle. So to give you an idea, a product is a tangible or intangible creation of a particular culture. If you want to think about it in grammatical terms, I'm a language teacher, that's what I do. These are nouns, generally speaking. A tangible product would be like chopsticks. It could be a water bottle, a smartphone, things like that. It could even be something large, like a monument or a church or something like that. Intangible cultural products are things you can't touch. A character from a book, a political system, a law, a dance, something like that. A cultural practice, is a pattern of social interaction and behavior. So grammatic, again, the language teacher in me is saying these are verbs. These are things people do, right? They often involve products. So in the illustration here, you have this is patterns of behavior, one way you should and one way you should not use your chopsticks in Japanese table etiquette, right? So there's a product there, the chopsticks, and in fact, the rice illustrated there is also a product. But the practice is, yes, maybe you should, when you're not using your chopsticks, rest them across the bowl, and definitely do not stick them straight up in your rice, as that is mimicking a death ritual. So you don't want to associate your food with death, right? So what to do, when and where in a culture, that's a practice. Perspectives are the most complicated piece, which is why I give you a picture of an iceberg. You may be familiar with the iceberg model of culture. So the stuff that's above the water, you can think of those as products and practices. We could see them with our eyes, generally speaking, not all the time, but often. And down below the surface of the water, these are perspectives. So perspectives are the why for the product, the why for the practice. And they can capture the philosophical perspectives, the meanings, attitudes, values, and beliefs that a culture has. They are often multiple for any practice or product. They are often very difficult, whether you're inside or outside a culture, to see. So people, I mean, think of it this way. We engage in products and practices all the time, but do we always know why? Do we always know the historical background? Do we always know necessarily every single one of the sort of philosophical reasons that these are happening? No. It's really hard. It's that underneath the ocean part of the iceberg. So when I work with students on this model, especially when you're coming to a culture from outside, and even when you're inside, the important thing in a class is to ask questions, make guesses, and do research. And you may not know all the answers. Okay, I think it's the most fascinating part of it. So product, practice, perspective. All right, so with that, do a little activity here. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm going to have you raise your hand, and Nellie or Angelica, you can call on one person to tell us if it's a product, a practice, or a perspective. Ready? Just a few of them. So leaving a tip, is it a product, a practice, or a perspective? Go ahead, raise your hand. They will call on you. Don't be shy. Anybody? Just raise your hand.
Stephanie?
Fine, that's a practice.
Thanks, Stephanie. It
You're
sure is.
welcome.
All right, so that is a practice. So in this photo, we have products. We have the tip jar. We have the money. We have that really nice note, which I identify with. And it is a practice. If you put the tip in the tip jar, if you leave a tip, that is a practice, something you do. The perspectives can be multiple, and they will be different across cultures. For example, in Japanese culture, you don't leave a tip. You don't leave a tip in Japan, not for anything. And the perspective behind that particular practice is that there is a feeling that a person in any job situation is paid a fair wage. And so if you pay them extra money, you're saying your job is, you're sort of, you could be insulting their employer or their employment, right? So that's a Japanese perspective. But from a US perspective, it's quite different, right? You're sort of honoring the service that somebody has given to you, in addition for paying for your scone and your coffee, etc. All right, here's another one. Airports. Airports. Product, practice, or perspective. Go ahead and raise your hand. You will get called on. Anybody want to tell me? Any hands? Don't be shy.
Susan, please.
Product.
It sure is, Susan. It's a product. That's the beautiful Portland Airport, by the way. And big places can be products, and products can be filled with products. That's fine. Products all around. There are practices associated with airports. There are things that we do to wear a mask or not wear a mask in an airport, for example, would be a practice. Let's see, going through TSA, that is a practice. Perspectives can be many, many in a place like an airport. The design of an airport, how people move through an airport, there can be perspectives behind that as well. So just full of culture. Here's another one. Removing your shoes before entering a home. Product, practice, or perspective.
Morgan, please. Share
That's
your
a
thoughts.
practice.
Sure is, Morgan. It sure is a practice. And in this photo, you see cultural products. You see shoes, for example. The space where these shoes are left, that's a product. Taking off your shoes is a practice. And a perspective can be, for example, not wanting to bring dirt from outside inside. Ideas and taboos around cleanliness can be perspectives as well. But yeah, removing your shoes before entering a home, a practice, a cultural practice. Thank you. All right. So here's one. Here's one I think that we all may be familiar with. So we have a birthday cake. Clearly, it's got candles in it. Those candles are on fire, or lit. I'm sorry. And so can anybody? So we see the product right in front of us. What? If you raise your hand, can you tell us a practice involved with this particular product? Go ahead and raise your
Yeah,
hand.
please help us with this one.
Linda, I see your hand.
Sure. I think the practice would be singing happy birthday and the blowing out of the candles.
Very good. Those are two excellent, yes, practices involved with this particular product. Now, and again, you don't have to have the answer to this, but does anybody have any perspectives here about this product and the practices involved? For example, why we light candles on fire, put them in a birthday cake, and blow them out after singing a song?
Linda, do you want to follow up with an answer?
Sure. In some cultures, doing this is because you're celebrating that someone is alive another year.
Yes.
I know in Ecuador, rather than doing candles that you blow out, instead there are no candles on the cake, and you push the celebrant's face into the cake. And that's the thing, that's celebrating that you're alive another year.
Delightful. I love knowing that. I did not know that. Great. So thank you. So I think that I really like the example of the birthday cake because I mean, when you take it down into the products, practices, and perspectives model, I think there are things we understand. There are things we know that we do, things that we know that we use. But I think I bring this to students every time I teach a culture class and say, but why do we blow out the candles? And but why is it that and not some, for example, as in Ecuador, pushing someone's face into a cake, right? So there's a real complexity to perspectives. And when you're inside a culture, when you're outside of a culture, they can be really hard to see. You do them. You just do them. Oftentimes you don't know why you do them. And that's okay. But that's the sort of to me, the exciting challenge of cultural perspectives. So that's the model. I'm going to shift gears and start talking about popular culture, which is a little bit different. It's a part of culture, but it's a particular sort of part of culture. So, popular culture. I will get to this picture in a moment, but some characteristics, certainly not all, but some characteristics of popular culture that I like to talk about with my students are commodification and consumption. Popular cultural products and practices generate money and they are consumed, whether they are purchased, whether we're talking about hits or clicks. They're things that people purchase and people sort of access. So, commodification and consumption. They are interactive, they are changing, and they are changeable. So, I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment, but think about it as a popular culture product or practice can start in one place and move across other cultures and come back. And in that movement, can change and come back to where it started in a really different state. Often it's written off as trendy, as temporary, flash in the pan, not going to last, or low culture. But it always has historical foundations and deeper meanings. There's always something to it, there's always meaning to it. And talking with students about that is really important because I think what what students will know about popular culture is they like it. I like it. I'm interested in it. But, you know, who knows what it means? Popular culture are often sites of resistance and rebellion. It's people sort of take it for granted. They underestimate products and practices of popular culture. And so those products and practices can be used to resist the dominant culture and rebel against it, which I think is really exciting. And due to that sort of idea of flow, there are issues of translation and cultural odor. So I'll talk, let me explain. So what you have here is a picture of what's called cosplay. Cosplay is a portmanteau word of costume and play. Um, this concept, this practice, has been happening all over, but it really was happening in the United States. And in 1984, a Japanese journalist named Takahashi Nobuyuki went to the, what is it called? The World Science Fiction Convention in Los Angeles, also called Worldcon. And he observed folks dressing up as their favorite sci-fi characters from books, from comic books, from movies and TV shows. And he put this word together when he came back to Japan to write about it in a magazine. So there's a history of what was called costuming before in the United States, where people were dressing up like that. And when this, and it was happening in Japan as well. But when the term got coined, it really started rising in popularity, and it got media attention in Japan. So there was TV footage, and there were more articles written about it, and it really boosted its popularity. And then Japanese people doing cosplay, primarily characters from Japanese animated series, movies, and graphic novels, seeing that in the international media spread back to countries outside Japan, such as the United States and beyond, where people started doing the same thing, where they started dressing up as figures from Japanese popular culture. So it moved around and it gained popularity in the United States more recently because of seeing Japanese folks doing this with Japanese characters. So the Japaneseness of it was attractive to folks outside of Japan as this Japanese cultural practice flowed around the world. Cultural odor can be a good thing, or it can be too much of that particular culture, and that's an interesting interplay to talk about as well. So the other thing to point out is that folks spend a lot of time, a lot of money and effort on these costumes and going to these cons, they're called conventions, cons, and engaging in this particular popular cultural practice. So I think cosplay is a really good example to look at popular culture from Japan. But I have more, obviously. I want to talk about a Japanese cultural perspective called Kawaii. Kawaii. So I think you all see that this is a toaster. It's not just any toaster, though. No, no. This is not your chrome toaster or a toaster oven. This is a Hello Kitty toaster. So this popular cultural product is very obviously from popular culture. So not only do you have Hello Kitty on your toaster, it's pink, which is a hallmark of Kawaii, and you get Hello Kitty's face on your toast. Perfect popular cultural product. Practices can be using it, of course. Perspectives are really interesting because you can buy so many toasters in the world. Toasters that don't put Hello Kitty's face on it. So why would you spend the extra money and effort, probably ordering it on the internet, most likely, to get yourself one of these instead of some other toaster, right? So the reason for that for a lot of folks is kawaii. So kawaii is often translated as cute. It's precious, lovable, often tiny, innocent, vulnerable. It can mean pretty. This is a Japanese word from about the turn of the 20th century. And it comes from this word kawayushi or kawayui, which means a flushed face implying embarrassment. It's probably a little bit what my face looks like right now, probably red, with a secondary meaning of pathetic, vulnerable, darling, loving, and small. Uh, so it's a relatively recent term. The antonym is literally just not kawaii. So it doesn't have this an antonym sort of opposed to it out here at all. It's related to the word kawaiso, which is poor and pitiful. And I want you to think about, translation is a tricky thing. Cute doesn't really capture this translation. The word cute in English comes from it comes from the 1700s. I mean, we think of it as meaning attractive in a pretty or endearing way, but when it first appeared in the 1700s, you could still hear it in sort of late 20th century English. It meant shrewd or clever. Don't be cute, right? Don't be clever. Was something you hear in sort of classic films. So it has a little bit of a negative connotation. But right now, think of it as portrayed in the films of Walt Disney, right? The ultimate good. It's goodness and optimism as opposed to, the evil characters in a Disney film. It's a Disney princess, essentially. It's, yeah. Now, an example of kawaii from Japanese popular culture that you can watch on Netflix right now is this character. This is Retsuko from the Netflix show Aguretsuko. Aguretsuko and all of her companions in the show, they have different various animal faces. Aguretsuko is a red fox. She works in a traditional Japanese company in the accounting section. She wears a uniform to work because of the level of worker that she is. Um, and she's not exactly an office lady, but she does clerical work. And she works in a really traditional office setting where gender roles are very much defined. Um, so there are gender roles and expectations that she has to follow. Her boss is literally a pig and treats people and treats Retsuko pretty badly. And so to when things get really tough for Retsuko, she becomes Aguretsuko when she goes to a karaoke bar and she sings death metal. And she turns into this amazing, raging monster to sort of get out all of her feelings about how she's being treated. And so by day, she's following the rules. She's doing what she's supposed to do. And when she can no longer stand it, she's she's becoming this whole other character. And she can do this because of kawaii, because she's because we can see her do this because she's a character, because she's got this large head to body ratio, these large round eyes, and so friendly. And so we more sympathize with her because she's kawaii, doing this thing that is actually quite a bit rebellious, and giving us a picture about Japanese society and how it hurts her, essentially. So kawaii comes in lots of expressions, and this is not encompass them all. Um, so from food to fashion to actual goods, cultural products, to this one on the end. This is Fuko-chan. This is a Japanese Yurukyara mascot. You might see Yurukyara around. They are representatives of they can be representatives of anything. They can be governments, they can be regional authorities, they can be representatives of businesses, nonprofit organizations. And they are large and often very, very cute. I mean, Fuko-chan is representing a city in Saitama, which is outside of Tokyo. The specialty of the city that she represents is long onions. So she's a rabbit with long onion ears. This is a real phenomenon. People go out to specifically see mascots like fukkachan. The real word for mascots in Japanese is yurukyara, and that means a loose character. And these folks embody kawaii, but they also have a real place for Japanese people. They go out, they seek out in their everyday life to meet these yurukyara, and partly because they are kawaii. You can have kawaii on your phone or kawaii in your pocket. These little guys on a cell phone that people carry around all the time. Kawaii is expressed in fashion. This is this picture of this young lady here is she is dressed in specifically decora kawaii or decorated kawaii fashion. And the hallmarks of decora kawaii fashion are bright pastel colors, heavy accessorization, both in terms of jewelry and in the hair, lots of clips and things like that. And people use this kawaii fashion to express themselves. This is who I am. This maybe not every single day in every single interaction that I have, but this is sort of who they are, maybe in their spare time, maybe not. And finally, on the left-hand side, kawaii is expressed in food. Um, this is a close-up shot of a kyara ben or character bento boxed lunch. So these are made by folks in an expression of love and caring to their children or to whoever they're making this box lunch for. We have a little dog rice ball dyed pink. So I mean, even in terms of the things that people consume, this is kawaii can be it is used sort of in an everyday fashion. A lot of time and energy, not to mention money, goes in to each one of these expressions of kawaii, and it's important to people, and it's fun, and it does tell you a little bit about Japanese culture and what's important to people. I want to shift gears a little bit as I wind up to talk about another kind of kawaii fashion. So there are many genres of kawaii. It's not all one thing. So there are things like grotesque kawaii, and this is an expression of yami kawaii or dark or sick kawaii. And while it has some of the hallmarks of other kawaii, sort of you do see pastel colors, you do see rounded lines and animated figures, but you also see darker themes that allow people to both express the sort of accessibility and vulnerability of traditional kawaii and then say something more and communicate more. So on the left-hand side, this practitioner of yami kawaii fashion is wearing tights. These are tights. And the tights on them, the tights they're wearing have wounds and injuries. Now, the cuts have clearly pink blood coming off of them, and wounds and such. And that's alarming, but it's also kawaii. So it's a really hard juxtaposition. The person on the right hand side, also bright colors, lots of accessories, but medical themes like there are syringes, band-aids, medical themes. A lot of folks who are yami kawaii practitioners are doing this to both be accessible, but also show on their outside what is unacceptable to talk about using, words and, talking to people. In Japanese society, as in many societies, it's not acceptable to talk about mental illness. It's not acceptable to talk about trauma in sort of everyday life. And so it's almost like making this, not forcing a conversation, but making a conversation out there, right on the outside of your body, to bring it to people's attention. When we talked about this in my popular culture class, it resonated with students quite a bit. And because I think these are our students struggle with mental illness as well. And seeing how people express that in other cultures can be helpful and interesting, and maybe give a little bit of comfort and interest to folks who are dealing with that themselves. So, takeaways. if you're thinking about How can I do this in my own classes? I know we teach a variety of different things. We have students with a variety of different interests. But if you want to talk about specifically Asia, cultures in Asia, any culture really, ask your students what they're interested in. What is it about, for example, what is it about Mexico? What is it about Japan? What is it about Spain? What is it about France? What is it that interests you? Just ask a direct question, however you're comfortable doing that. And when they bring you things, do some research. Find out more about that. I mean, don't be like me and say you like it, I love it. Some things just may not interest you, but you know, take some time and sort of find out for yourself from your disciplinary perspective what's going on with these things that your students are interested in, and consider incorporating them into your course. I use this picture of Pokemon Airlines because it's an airline. Also, because Pokemon generated in 2019 $100 billion in their, the various things that Pokemon does, from video games to airlines to movies to series. And I think if you're in, this can be interesting in any discipline, but for example, if you're teaching courses in business, in marketing, in economics, in psychology, and many other disciplines, thinking about like, why is this? You have data sets. If popular culture is commodified and consumed, there's data involved, certainly, and talking about that data, analyzing that data, and also talking about why these things have appeal, not just to students, but in the cultures that they came from and other cultures around the world, I think can be really valuable and interesting. And this is something that a student has brought to you. Um, and so they're already motivated to learn about it. Consider introducing the 3Ps model to students as a way of thinking about culture. There will be students for whom it doesn't resonate, and there will be students who, once they get started thinking about it, are just blown away. I can't stop thinking about it is the quote that comes up most often. um, it's hard to turn a corner and have students understand that it's all important, that there's meaning behind everything, and move away from this idea that I don't have any culture, there's no culture around me. It's hard to turn that corner for some folks, but once they understand that everything has meaning, everything is significant and is worth learning about, then the world can open up. And if you want to talk more, that's my email address. Nellie and Angelica know how to get hold of me. I'm happy to talk more about this. This is one of the most fun things that I do. So I'm really happy to have been able to talk about it with you today. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. We're going to open it up to questions now.
I had a question I put in the chat.
Okay.
So when someone is dressing in such a way with syringes and the pills and the pink blood and showing harm, and that's to let people know, not through talking, but as you said, exterior, that they're suffering.
Right.
So should family and friends be worried and initiate a conversation when a family member dresses in such a way?
I think when we're in Japanese culture, I think that is probably a conversation that can be had, but in that culture, it's, I think, even more so than in sort of dominant US culture, that's not a conversation people like to have. And so, I would think that asking the question would be, I mean, I have a lot of familiarity with mental health issues. I know that I would ask the question of a friend or a family member who is exhibiting. So tell me what's going on. Because I think in some ways, for some folks, it is to provoke a conversation. And the difficulty is that sometimes that doesn't happen in Japanese culture. And so, yeah, I would think so. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I shocked you into silence. I'm sorry. Not what I wanted.
Morgan, please go
Yes.
ahead, ask your question.
It's not a question. I just wanted to say that I took Morgan's class last year, spring term, and learning it this way was really effective for me. Because, like she was saying, a lot of students feel like they don't have a culture. And going into that class, I felt the same way because, I grew up in the United States, and growing up around so many different cultures, I had a really hard time identifying what mine was. So using that model was really helpful for me to examine the things that my family does and realize, oh, well, we do have traditions that we do that are unique to the United States and where I'm from. So I wanted to say it was a really, really fun class. I really enjoyed it. So coming from a student, it was
Thank you,
really
Morgan.
fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Morgan.
I have another question for the presenter.
Sure.
So, Morgan, have you discovered that students enroll in Japanese because of their interest in the pop culture? And then when realizing, wow, there's work involved, this is going to be harder than I thought to learn the language.
Mm.
Excuse me, or it's going to take me years to be at the point where I can watch my anime and understand what they're saying, that they lose heart and that they withdraw? Or are you able to keep them interested, involved, engaged, and enrolled?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that the interesting thing is that the students can have no Japanese language knowledge and come to the culture class and the pop culture class. And so it does have the effect of bringing folks maybe in who are curious, or they're just, or maybe they don't have linguistic, curiosity about the language, but they want to know more about, you can engage in Japanese popular culture and a lot, and not in just traditional culture anyway, you all the time. You can go to a sushi restaurant, etc. So we get that population of students, but the students taking language, absolutely we have attrition. Absolutely they do. They some of them will make that decision a lot of times in the first term. So we teach on the term system rather than semesters. And in the first term, they come to grips with the fact that, yeah, it is, Defense Language Institute like ranks it as a level 5, like of out of 5 in terms of difficulty. It is not easy to learn. However, the ones that stick with it, and then people will drop out throughout, the 2 years for lots of reasons that don't have to do with the difficulty of the language, life related reasons, or, moving or things like that. But the folks that stick with it, we talk a lot about motivation, and how motivation changes, and it is the key to sort of staying power in a language and making your way all the way through. Part of the draw for the culture classes in particular is they count towards our gen ed program. I made sure that they are part of that program. So we have folks take, and they're 3 credits. And so those classes I try and take like they're like a survey. So learn more and deepen your knowledge about Japanese culture. Then maybe I'll move over to the language courses. But for a lot of folks, they want to, at a community college where tuition is lower than at a 4-year, they're wanting to complete, if they need to take, finish 2 years of a language in order to move on to, a BA degree or another liberal arts degree, they're looking to do that. But it does take continued examination of your motivation. Do you know why you're doing this? It can't just be because I got to finish this requirement. A lot of them come with a great love and interest, and then sort of build and deepen that in their time. So yeah, there are people who are totally scared off by the difficulty, but I try to be a mentor. I'm not Japanese. This was very difficult for me, and I am very upfront that I didn't receive an A grade until I was the only student in my 4th year Japanese class in undergrad, and that was like skin of my teeth. And graduate school is the same way. It was really, really challenging, but just because something's challenging doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And so modeling and mentoring that is part of my job too.
So how many semester hours are required of a language at your community college?
There's no language requirement. We don't have a language.
Okay, I thought I heard you say that something about a gen ed or something about a requirement.
Right, right. So we have a gen ed program, but students come to PCC for a lot of different degree goals, and some of them aren't degree seeking at all. And so I try and ascertain, like, why are you here every term? Like, are you doing this for the credits? Are you doing this because you're interested? Some combination of both. Um, but yeah, we have different degrees people are going for, and they can satisfy those degrees with multiple different. We're not the only gen ed class, so they can do that with lots of different courses, but a lot of them are taking Japanese culture courses to help satisfy a gen ed requirement. So the culture classes are separate from our language classes in a way. They're taught in different ways and for different amounts of credit. Yeah, and we're lots of intricate systems in our institutions, right? Very particular to the place. And I've been there for almost 14, 15 years, and I'm still getting my head around it. Any other questions? Yeah. Please go ahead.
Morgan, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. We have a lot of language and culture teachers on the WebEx today, I can see.
Nice.
And I am one of those.
German, right?
One of the difficulties I think that I face sometimes in teaching the 3Ps and teaching culture to students is that it tends to be more like culture consumption, or it's like I'm spoon feeding them some things, and then it's harder to get them from the surface, like a superficial level, into a deeper level of cultural reflection.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips or tricks, or what sort of things do you do to kind of move beyond that superficial look, or like they're outside looking in to the culture, and kind of involve them more in the process?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that part of it is it's a noticing, it's drawing attention. I mean, starting out with okay, you see how this is culture. And making time and space for the discussion, and understanding that for some folks, they'll get it quickly, and some folks will get it in the process of your ability, within the bounds of time and space where you can observe it. And for some folks, that will happen not when you can observe it. And sort of understand and be comfortable with the fact that not everybody's in the same place in getting this is the first thing I have to remember. There are folks that it's going to be surface, because it's hard to learn how to talk about this stuff, to sort of express it. And a lot of folks will get it, but the articulating about it to another person can be really, really challenging. And so sort of making time and space, the thing that I really like to do is, let's talk about it first and then write about it, because people process in so many different ways. And hearing other students talk about their understanding and their perceptions and their experience will a lot of times spark students who are not really getting it, and multiple points of contact for doing that. So I have them talk to each other. I'm having a conversation with each of my students in an individual shared Google Doc with a common question every week. And the other thing is, I really think that having a course that is only in English to only talk about culture can be really key. And I know that that doesn't fit into a lot of different, language curricula. And like I have to admit, like, I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not taking an academic anthropological perspective for this. I am a Japanese language teacher, and these are the tools that I have to deal with it. And my students, they know me or out me, and so they feel comfortable talking and working through this with me. So having a culture class where this is the point of focus can be really, really helpful. And I mean, I should say it's part of Japanese studies as a discipline to do this in English. I mean, I took a class like this. We only read novels. So wait a second. I know in a lot of, in Japanese culture courses, and as well as for European language as well, doing this through film can be really helpful, because you see interactions, and you see practices in addition to products, and you can discuss perspectives. So films can be really helpful. And I know in German, it's a really strong thing, because there's so many strong films that you can show that are accessible. And in some language disciplines, it's just flat out hard to get films that students can watch, and you don't have to say, oh yeah, and by the way, you have to pay $5 for this, right? Um, so yeah, many points of contact, and understand that it takes time for everybody and different time. So yeah, did I answer? I talked a long time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really helpful. We also have those sorts of classes here in our language, in our world languages department, the culture classes that are in English about the languages and cultures that we're studying. And we're trying to get more and more going with time as well. And I think that helps a lot too.
Yeah, and I mean, language teacher. I'm happy to, and I don't know if Stephanie's still here. She's probably gone, but we're really excited to talk about this because it's something that fewer and fewer people are taking languages full stop in the United States at the college level, and that's something that like gives me a little bit of a panic attack, to be honest. But this is a great way in these kinds of courses, and they're important. They're important. They're worth students' time taking. But I think a lot of them think Japanese is exotic and they don't understand it. And so they're going to gravitate to these classes. Whereas, well, I mean, everybody knows about Spanish culture. Not true. Everybody knows about German. Not true. There are things to be learned. And so finding a way to convince folks to push them in that direction, it can be challenging, but I think there's got to be ways to do it. And collaboration can be really helpful. Yeah. Anybody else have any answer? Any other questions?
Stephanie has her hand.
Hi. I just wanted to say hello, and I am still here. And I am. And Morgan is an incredible colleague for a lot of reasons. And one of those is this deep love and understanding of culture and how to convey these concepts that can be really abstract and really, really difficult in a way that's very accessible. And so I have developed culture classes alongside with Morgan's culture classes. And yeah, they have been a really great entry point for some students into the language program. I think last year from the Spanish culture class I taught, about a quarter of the students that took that class ended up taking language classes because of the experience they had in the culture class. And vice versa happens every year. People from the language classes want to take the culture class. And so they go together. They don't, it's not a standalone separate thing. And I think that's something that we always strive to help students and faculty understand, is that language and culture they go together. They're not, you can't separate them. You can't tease them out one from the other. And so having these culture classes and approaching it with a 3Ps model, I've seen it, over the years. It really helps students get a bigger picture of why they're studying language at all, why they're studying culture at all, and how it goes together. So
Thanks, buddy.
well done, Morgan. You're welcome.
Super. Anybody else? Oh. Oh, wow. That's a lot of people here. All right. Exciting. I have no idea. I'm here at the top.
Thank you again, Morgan. This was wonderful. And any folks who are at Harper, or if you want Morgan's contact information, you can reach out to Angelica, Rich, or I, and we'll forward it along. But thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. Morgan, Susan, Stephanie, and if Ann Hubbard's here, thank you, Ann Hubbard. All right.
We do have a little form in the chat, so you can share feedback about the session if you'd like. So it's in the chat feature. And just to let you know, for those of you who are participating in our other sessions today, we are going to take a break so that you can go grab lunch, catch up on emails, do some other things, and then we will start back up at 1 o'clock Central Time. Look forward to seeing you guys again then.
I guess I'll go. This is so funny. Is there anything else you need from me? Oh, thank you.
Can I ask you, can Linda and I pick your brain on one thing real quick?
Sure, of course.
Same thing I was just going to mention, Kim.
So We have one of these classes for German, for example, German culture and civ. And I just had every spring. About half of the students are students I know already and are in German classes already, and then half of them are just, they kind of randomly landed in the class. But I was wondering, at your school, how do you get people to enroll in those courses under the language department? Are they a like JPN number, or is it a humanities number?
No, they're JPN. I would have to be hired in a different way by another department in order to teach under any other prefix. That's just
Okay.
particular to PCC. So yeah, they're JPN. And these courses existed before I came to work at PCC, but I've since, updated them quite significantly. So yeah, they're coming for JPN. And it's because we went through a big gen ed redesign project, which and so we had the opportunity to take courses that were already there to update them to the new standards. And if Stephanie's still here, she can chime in because her experience has been quite different. But I've not. People come to the Japanese courses, and with a similar thing, I have about half and half. This term, I have half students that I know from first and second year courses are from previous terms, and then a half that I don't know. And some come with interest but no knowledge of Japanese culture whatsoever, which is really exciting. And some come with previous knowledge. They're from other instructors, or they, and so it's a mixed bag. And they're coming. I think they're coming for the JPN-ness of it.
Okay. All right.
That's my suspicion. And I mean, I survey people, but a lot of times, people take classes and they're not really sure why they're taking it. I mean,
How do you
free
get
credit, but
How do you get the word out about the class? Because I know, for example, the issue that we're having in our language department with this is that they're listed under the language. And so if someone doesn't speak German, they're not going to look under GER as a prefix.
Yep. So we put in the schedule and in the course description, course taught in English. That helps when we publicize, like public, we're still remote. So basically, posting to your students the term before, posting to your colleagues, and using the sort of channels, but some kind of eye-catching poster with the simple information they need to know, especially with course taught in English really, really prominently.
Yeah.
There's no perfect way though, because people have.
It's really hard.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of internal bias about like language isn't for me. And I'm gonna have to do something. What's this about? It can be a real challenge. I mean, what Stephanie deals with a lot is this assumption that people Spain is Mexico, number one, and also there's nothing new to learn in a course like that. And so it's a struggle every year. Having supportive administrators is also crucial and finding the right topic and theme for students can be really, really challenging as well. Mine are they're listed really basically: Japanese culture, Japanese pop culture, but within that I decide on a topic, on a theme for the course. And that's what I publicize with. So that gets the big letters. And then this is, JPN 260, 268 Japanese culture. And so there's no perfect way. And it is a real challenge, but because how important this is,
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we're already doing, and Kim, for her German culture and civ class, is doing everything you mentioned, Morgan.
We
have the flyers that we put all over campus, and we are our language department is still mainly remote. We tried to get back on campus, and the majority of the classes we canceled were all the on-campus ones. But students didn't want to go back. But and Kim does all of that. She lets all of her students know, right? We email, we tell everyone in the department. We send these things to everyone who teaches every language. I don't think it's the keeping them in there; it's getting them in the first place.
Yep.
Because our people do a great job. It's just you've got to attract them. And to Kim's point, even though the description says taught in English, how would they know to go and look it up in the German section? Because they're going to assume that